Welcome to In Our Own Defense Podcast. We're your host, Attorney A.D. Winters, founder and managing attorney of VeteransDefender.com, and Dr. Dolores Tarver, licensed psychologist. For more information about our podcast, find us on Instagram at In Our Own Defense or via email at inourown.defense@gmail.com. To tell you a little bit more about our mission statement, our mission is to share truths and create dialogue that increases our listeners' awareness of a variety of concerns to foster the development of a holistic plan, which incorporates mental, physical, spiritual, financial, and intellectual wellness.
The information provided during the In Our Own Defense podcast does not and is not intended to constitute legal advice and is not a substitute for mental health or medical health care from qualified professionals. Instead, all information, content, and materials available on this podcast are for general informational purposes only.
Well, good to see you again, Dr. Tarver, and welcome to another episode of the In Our Own Defense podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing awesome, Sauce. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. And, in this episode of In Our Own Defense podcast, we have the luxury of featuring life coach and author, Mr. DeRon. He's an incredible leader and an incredible relationship coach, and he tells these truths that people oftentimes may find challenging, but they're based in hard truth. Just to kind of talk about this, to set the scene of what we're doing, oftentimes I feel that the progression of our culture is oftentimes being undermined by internal sabotage, whether it's black on black crime or speaking and claiming these horrendous, useless stereotypes that people have spoke on us. We kind of internalize them and claim them and try to use them as terms of endearment. But one of the things that's really heartbreaking to me is this relationship between African Americans. It seems as if the women and men, that portion, it seems very vitriolic. And recently I read this study at the National Institute of Health. You can go to their website to see it's called Married Black Men's Opinions as to why Black women are disproportionately single, and it's a qualitative study. In that study, the study's purpose was to explore the reasons Black women are disproportionately single according to the unique viewpoint of married Black men. The sample comprised 52 married Black men who resided in Northeast Georgia, mean age 43. Qualitative interviews were conducted in 2010 as part of a Pathways to Marriage study. The authors analyzed the data in a collaborative fashion and utilized content analysis to explore the relationships in the data, which were derived from the qualitative interviews with the men. The findings on the reasons for the disproportionality of the singlehood among Black women reflect that these four themes: gender relations, marriage, education, and socialization, individual development, and a preference for gay, lesbian relationships. Recommendations for future research was definitely discussed because it was such a finite study. Recent estimates highlighted that an important trend: Black women are less likely to intermarriage or remarry than Black men or women from other racial ethnic groups. The American Fact Finder in 2011 found that, furthermore, 7 out of 10 Black women are unmarried and 3 out of 10 may never marry. Thus, the disproportionate number of Black women who are single has been well documented. The demographic pattern is so noticeable that it has even received considerable attention from the popular media. CNN documentary titled Black in America, ABC News Nightline special titled Why Can't a Successful Black Woman Find a Man? So I know that was a lot to kind of kick us off in the show, but it was, this is a great qualitative study that people can go and read. It's a great qualitative study that people can go and read and learn more about what it is that we're seeing. So while conversations feel like they're a battle of the sexes, what do you think, what's triggering this kind of mood, Dr. Tarver?
The information that you just read in that study.
Yeah. So,
if you want to know what's triggering that, you highlighted it because there is so much attention and press and there is this constant barrage of information for Black women that guess what? All of you won't be able to get married. Guess what? All of you won't be able to find relationships. You can hear it in the news. You can see it in that. And I do think it's important, and they highlighted it in that study. That is a qualitative study. Those are always smaller studies, and we have to be careful not to generalize those findings to larger populations. And they did mention that. But you can go to anybody's family reunion or barbecue, and the questions to women are very different than the questions they are to men. Baby, why you ain't found no man yet? What's wrong with you? Is you a lesbian? So I think that part of it is that we're tired of hearing it. We're tired of having those conversations. We're tired of being the focus. It's a very different focus when you talk about Black women in dating, in my perception, than it is when you talk about Black men in dating. And one of the things that gets a woman riled up, and I'm so happy we have our guest on, Mr. DeRon, to talk about this, is for Black men to be talking about Black women in their dating. And so I know that he has gotten that feedback from women probably countless numbers of times, especially as a married man, speaking on why women are single. So we're going to get into all of that. I'm very excited about this conversation, and we can have these conversations without it being hostile, without it being angry, without us throwing slurs around and generalizations, but just really just play around with, hey, what are some of the problems that we have with dating? And that goes across women and men, and we'll be highlighting that today.
And I think you're right, and I too am excited to bring Mr. DeRon on. You know, naturally, we wanted to talk about these responses and why they're so vitriolic, but I think it's best to bring this relationship coach in. Mr. Terry DeRon, he's 41 years old. He's been married for 15 years. He's an author, influencer, a podcaster. He's a Southern University alum, so go SU. Always put SU in the house. So he's a graduate, and he's a member of my beloved Kappa Alpha Psi there at Southern Alpha Sigma is where he pledged that. And so today he gives dating advice and insight on quality man's perspective, a quality group of men's perspective, and focused on providing context and understanding on how men think and operate and approach dating, and teaching women how to eliminate or avoid thinking behaviors that has been proven to create conflicts with quality men. He's authored 2 books. He authored the first one, he made me feel like such a slacker. He authored his first book when we were in college, in undergrad. So Game Recognized Game. It's a novel, beautiful novel, well written. I purchased, I think, a couple of the books. I purchased one, and then one time I bought one at homecoming after probably having too much Kappa juice. And then he has this new book out on Amazon. It's Not Complicated: How Real Men Feel About Sex, Love, and Relationship. Oftentimes people find men as being closed off and not willing to share these truths. And women are always asking, what are you thinking? What's on your mind? What's going on? And Mr. DeRon tells that. So Dr. Tarver, I ask you to help me welcome Mr. Terry DeRon. Thank you, sir. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the show. How are you today?
Thank you. I appreciate the love. I appreciate the grand entrance. And I appreciate y'all reaching out to bring me on the show.
Okay, Dill. Thank you. In our own defense podcast today, we're discussing barriers to healthy dating relationship. I've noticed that your approach and your style seems to be different from what I would sometimes describe as a Steve Harvey approach. It seems to be focused on being an honest broker, an accountability partner, and assisting with strategic and focused dating. How would you describe your style or your approach to being a relationship coach?
I did take a completely different approach than the mainstream approaches that I saw with people like Derek Jackson, Tony Gaskins, Steve Harvey's, etc. These are people that are really popular in media in general, but are extremely popular in social media in particular. The reason that I took a different approach is I didn't really see a lot of results. I personally don't see much benefit to women talking about the men that they don't want to be with. And a lot of those other guys, they target the past trauma women have experienced, their past dating failures with undesirable F-boys, bums, deadbeats, etc. And so from a logical standpoint, that makes no sense to focus your time and energy speaking about them. when the men that women really want to be with, those are the ones they're having the problems with. And so my logic was, if I can provide women with the authentic perspective on how quality men think, feel, and operate, it would do a couple of things. My primary mission is to provide that voice for guys. A lot of men can't articulate themselves the way that I do. My line name is communicator. I speak better than the average guy, especially when I'm talking about subject matter that I'm passionate about or really interested in. And I can't think of nothing I'm more passionate about than romantic endeavors. So it's really interesting to talk about, and it's really beneficial for the people that actually listen. Secondly, I wanted to correct a lot of the misinformation that's out there, and the myths and the assumptions that a lot of women use to formulate their dating strategies. It's a brutally honest, a tough love type of approach that comes with a lot of feedback, a lot of negativity. It's hard to tell whether that's just because it's on social media or because of the subject matter, but those two together make for very hostile conversations for a lot of people. But it allows me to reach people all around the world. It allows me to spark conversations, spark thought, and trigger that perspective for some people that listen to my content, where they get that aha moment, where they view dating from a different perspective, or they look at it from a perspective that they've never experienced personally. So I'm doing my best to spread the word and try to bridge the gap between men and women, and hopefully bring down some of those numbers you referenced earlier.
Good deal.
Well, I am ready. I have got my Vaseline. I can take my earrings off at any time, so we can go ahead and get into this fight that we're about to have. Absolutely joking, but I do know that these conversations are tough for a lot of reasons that you just mentioned. We bring our past experiences into any new experience, and a lot of times our strategies, as you said, are based on old things we tried. But I want to put the question out because a lot of women would argue this point, and possibly men may feel different about it, that the dating experiences and expectations are different based on gender. So guidelines for men and guidelines for women are different. So let's have a conversation about that.
Tell me what these guidelines are. I often hear on my page, women will often say things like, women are forced to do this and women are forced to, and it's like, who's forcing? Last time I checked, women get to choose who they give their time, attention, and sex to. They get to choose which men they entertain. So what are these guidelines? I think there are questions that come up when a woman's habitually single. When you see an attractive woman that is good on paper, good job, cute, drive a Benz, got a house, etc. Why wouldn't you question why none of the men that she's been involved with choose to stay around? Why wouldn't you raise a question like, why is everybody a short-term scenario? And like you said, the questions that come with women about kids, about marriage, etc. And it's something that they have very little control over. Well, I say, look, that's not a very little direct control over, because a woman can definitely increase her chances of getting wifed up if she operates in a way that minimizes and decreases the conflict. Like my strategy is like super simple. Let's just eliminate the stuff we know create problems, and if you do that in any scenario, you're gonna have a less problematic scenario, which translates to being more enjoyable and more likely to last. So that's the approach that I take, because from a male perspective, that's how you get to be a hoe. That's how you get to be a thot. You maintain healthy relationships with all the women you're having sex with, and you keep it that way. You know what I mean? You perfect meeting new women, getting them on board, getting them to trust you and like you to that point. And so it's kind of ironic, all the things you learn from being a former hoe and having a promiscuous past.
Before you go down the hoe scroll, let's get back on the, so here are some examples of differences. You just mentioned, for example, why wouldn't I ask a woman why she is single? That question in itself, women would argue, is biased, because there is an assumption that is underlying that there's something has to be wrong with you for you to be single. So men will approach a woman with all right, let me see what's wrong with you, is what some people might say. Whereas when women approach men, there's not necessarily that same double standard. Like, you may not necessarily hear a woman ask you, why are you still single? There's just, I think, and much like Attorney Winters pointed out earlier in these articles, right? We expect that something's going to be off with some of y'all. Is kind of the message that women are getting. So now I'm getting scrutinized.
That's accurate. I mean, from the male perspective, it's very rare to meet and date a woman that has a minimal amount of unnecessary drama. So men expect a certain level of chaos and drama, largely in part because women are a lot more emotional than us. And the natural process of resolving conflict or getting through arguments often is very difficult from a male perspective because of what they encounter on a regular basis. The deflection, the lack of accountability, but what about this? Like, I experience this kind of in my comments all the time. It's almost impossible to have a discussion about something a woman does that creates a problem in a relationship without women doing everything in their power to reverse the conversation about what the men they don't want to be with do. You know what I mean? It's not, they don't talk about the quality men. They just want to focus on the bums, the deadbeats, and the dudes nobody wants. So it's like, from a guy perspective, it's like, well, y'all naming stuff that we don't do. We don't do none of this passive aggressive stuff. The quality men y'all want to be with don't operate in these ways. So why are we talking about the men that do? You know what I mean? Like, so that's the experience and the expectation I think most men have when they approach any woman, because they've seen it with their moms, their sisters, their cousins, their neighbors. And it's like that emotional decision making, that hopeless romantic ideology is problematic, and you can observe it throughout life, you know, if you just take a step back and pay attention.
Attorney Winters gave me permission to just bombard you with questions, so I'm going to take my privilege. Because I would say again, that is a difference in perception, because I would argue, and of course I'm a mental health provider, so I see the people that are good quality folks that still have a lot of challenges, that there are very good men who have a lot of hard times communicating themselves. I see a lot of great men who want to avoid conflict to the point that they don't address anything in their relationships. They'll check out. And I say a lot of good quality men who have assumptions about women, that they're going to be difficult or emotionally expressive. And so I think that sometimes we end up saying to women like, hey, you all are educated and qualified and you still have these challenges. But women would argue that you're educated men, you have all of these great characteristics, and you can still have those challenges too. So why are those looked at as different? Why is the conversation approaching dating different for that educated, qualified man versus that educated, qualified?
Well, I think the biggest difference is the dude is forced to adjust. The dude that has the problems that prevents him from having success with women is either going to adjust or just be at home playing Xbox out and with Mary Palmer. Like, so men don't have the option of having a I'm not going to change type of attitude like a lot of women do. And men are not struggling the way that women do. Even the men that may have issues, they may not even be really desirable. They're able to get consistent time, attention, and sex. And so from a male perspective, marriage, kids, and all that other stuff is optional. So if men are meeting their threshold or their goals consistently, they don't have much incentive to change. And so that's another reason I don't see the point in preaching to the F-boys and preaching to the guys that women don't want. They not listening anyway. They like, we good. We already winning. Like the biggest struggle we have is only sleeping with one woman. You know what I mean? Like trying to dwindle down to one woman. So to me, everything that we see, that ain't struggling from a male perspective. You know what I mean? Like they might not be husband material, but they able to consistently meet their relationship goals and their dating needs. So they're not about to change how they think and operate. And I think the women that approach the conversation with well, men struggle too. Well, men need to do it too. Like, yeah, you're right. You can name a whole bunch of stuff that men that are not nearly as successful as men like me need to do. Why they don't do it? I don't know. Why they operate like that? I can't explain it. I don't even see why women would care. You know what I mean? Like, learn to identify them and avoid them. You know what I'm saying? Learn about how to focus on the men that you do want and how to appeal to him, how to make yourself more desirable to him. That's what we do. I'm not focusing on how to make myself appealing to some fat, ugly chick. I don't care what her perspective is. I'm focused on the cute, attractive women I like. I'm going like, so that type of approach simplifies things and makes it make sense from a logical perspective to me. And I think the women that get out of this, I need to get all the other guys to admit that they're wrong and admit that they need to improve. That's never gonna happen. You know what I mean? Like, so I don't spend my time and energy focusing on that because I just think it's a waste of time and it doesn't yield results. If a woman can learn to not get herself cut off or to not mess up the dating situation she has with that quality husband material dude, she got a much better chance of ended up married, you know, reaching her relationship goals than the women that don't. Because the things that men experience that cause them to fall out of love, end up cheating, etc., it's usually the same. Like if you talk to a group of guys, their experiences ain't that different. You know what I mean? Like, and that's kind of the ironic part of dating several women or being promiscuous is you start to see so many patterns. You're like, oh, they all just slightly a little bit different. It's the same problems, the same issues, the same communication stuff, but just to different degrees on different stuff. So women are not as different as they seem to think that they are. And that's why men as a collective have almost the same dating experience.
So I guess that then begs the question. So again, there's that difference. So because you have more options, you would say, like we have this pool, because if we listen to the research that Attorney Winters just said, women don't have that.
Oh, it's already, it's
right?
already.
So our pool is smaller. And then, as you just said, now we're the ones that have to make sure we don't mess up in the relationship, that we don't.
So do men. Like I said, men naturally have to do that. If a man is operating in a way that makes him less desirable to the women he likes, he's going to adjust. He's going to get tired of seeing his homies get chose. He's going to get tired of missing out or shooting a shot and missing. He's going to make some adjustments. The men that don't are the 40-year-old virgins or the dudes that don't get looked at. Like, and nobody's checking for them. And obviously they don't have the self-awareness to make the adjustments on their own. So those men are going to struggle too. Or they're going to settle for somebody that they probably don't want to be with. But that's a personal choice. You know, the men that want to have success and want to be desired by the attractive women willingly make adjustments, willingly take criticism and make improvements on the experiences that the women dating them have.
All right, Attorney Winters, I've run that one out. So I'll let you ask one.
Hey, listen, I'm over here trying to see if I can get some popcorn on this show. Enjoy this dialogue, because look, this is an opportunity for us to have these truths and difference of opinion, but in a way, in a form that we can speak it and be respectful of each other. And you know, to address one of the statements you said, I have been known to date beautiful, fuller, thicker women back in my day, and so I have appreciated their candor. So I don't want anybody listening to think that we're saying that fat women are ugly or thicker women are ugly. That's not even what Mr. DeRon is saying. And I want to clarify that, but because I know there's some absolutely flawlessly gorgeous women that I went to school with that may have been on the plus side, and I had the privilege of maybe just having dinner or a glass of wine with them. So, but what you spoke on this, Mr. DeRon, about how you see women having, you know, the lack of adjustment. So if we just related this to basketball, in the first half, if you lost in the first half, you have to adjust. And that basketball segue allows me to think about how NBA star Steven Jackson recently recounted that he left his former fiance, Imani Showalter at the altar after she refused to sign the antenuptial, legal term is antenuptial, but prenuptial agreement. Ante means pre. Days ago, on your platform, one of your listeners and followers asked your opinion on a similar situation, and I'll read it verbatim so I won't confuse what they said. That one of your followers provided to you, I am engaged to be married in a couple of months, and I'm having a major issue with my fiance. When I originally discussed marriage with her, I made it crystal clear that I wanted to have a prenuptial agreement to protect my wealth. Well, now that the wedding is coming up, she has changed her mind about the prenup. What do you think about the situation? So when you were asked this, what is kind of your thoughts on that? And then I want to pose that question over to Dr. Tarver, if you don't mind.
To me, that's a really deceptive situation, and I couldn't think of any logical reason for a woman to just instantly just change her mind about signing a prenup when you verbally agreed to do it, and when the wedding is approaching, the deposit's paid for, plans are made, etc. So you're almost kind of pot committed from a financial standpoint. To me, that reeks of manipulation. Now we've all heard stories of gold diggers getting secure in the bag and marrying the dude with no prenup, and they get married 6 months later. I mean, a divorce, etc. So this looks like a situation where a person with wealth would be foolish to go through with, especially without a logical explanation. Because from my understanding, women get to sit with their attorney and come up with the agreement, terms, conditions, whatever, what they feel is reasonable and fair. Both people are represented. Both people get to participate in creating the agreement. And so to verbally do all that and say you're going to sign it and then not sign it at the end sounds like a Steven Jackson situation.
Definitely. Dr. Tarver, what do you think are catalysts for someone maybe having this, okay, I'm willing to do this, I love you, and I understand your desire to protect your wealth. And I understand how it costs you nothing to get married, $300, $400, whatever, to go and get a license and get married. But as you exit out of there, it's a bit more precarious. So what are your thoughts on what would lead someone to change their mind on something like that?
And, of course, we don't know what happened in these people's relationships prior to that. We just see these news stories. I will say oftentimes when I see people change their minds, they may not have felt like they had good representation. They might have felt bullied into taking that offer. They might have felt that they were in a situation in which they didn't have other options. I think sometimes things are sprung on people, and it's not that they really talked about this before. It was an ultimatum kind of situation. Whenever you have more power in a relationship, that always changes the dynamics. And so if I'm coming from a place where I have less power, then I feel that I am compelled to have to do what you ask me to do, which is why we have these dynamics in abusive relationships. To Mr. DeRon's point, I think manipulation can go both ways. I think that sometimes people can be manipulated into signing things and not be fully aware. I think there's sometimes people give trust to a partner, that I trust that you will honor me and respect me, and this information that you presented is accurate. And then I get it looked at by someone else and they tell me that wasn't actually accurate.
Okay, yeah, I ain't thought of. Well, okay, if there's some misrepresentation, then that's completely different. But I can definitely see that. Coercing somebody into signing, but I was operating under the assumption that that's not the case. He said that they agreed to do it. You know what I mean? Like, so to me, that indicates that there was some agreement and it was a mutual decision. If somebody's being coerced or being deceived into signing a prenup, like you hiding wealth or you misrepresenting something to that effect, then that's something that's completely different. But just from a basic standpoint, like a woman that's marrying an athlete or some type of millionaire, I can't think of no real reason where everything is on the up and up, where you're going to come away with 6 to 7 figures at the minimum, You're going to get to live a millionaire wife experience for however long the marriage does last. You get to move in the mansion. You get to copy a Bentley. You get to, like, what are you missing out on? Like the leverage or the decision making to me. So you love them, you having kids with them, everything is all good, but I refuse to sign this paperwork that says I walk away with this with X amount of dollars. To me, that's horrible decision making. And the way that the Steven Jackson situation played out, where his baby mama just kept trying to hit him for more child support and all this type of stuff. That's the kind of typical situation that men look at when it comes to prenuptial agreements, and women that finesse their way into engagement and then try to change their mind at the end.
Yeah, from a legal standpoint, these things present challenges. To what Dr. Tarver spoke about, naturally, if there's been some sort of fraud, duress, there are certain things that would prohibit the contract, because an agreement, this is a contract that they you have to have an offer, which is a manifestation, will, and sentence to an agreement so many as to justify another person's sentence invited and would concluded, and then you have to have an acceptance, which is the I accept, the assent. And so when you have those two things, considering that there are no vices that have harmed the making of that contract, then the contract's going to be valid. Oftentimes, in any agreement, and in the practice of law, you see people saying, hey, here's the agreement, go ahead and sign. Here's the lease, sign this lease. And then something like COVID-19 happens, and then you're like, wait, I can't pay my rent now. And that's unreasonable for me to have to pay rent when I don't have a job. The world has ended, essentially, and we're stuck in the house. Where am I going to get that kind of money to pay that rent? And so people are like, well, the Supreme Court says your signature is not a mere ornament. It's not a mere ornament. Once you sign that, that means that you are compelled to be part of that. And that's why we make signing so important. Historically, ages ago, they used to exchange left shoes. In marriages, part of what we've gotten away from is part of this old school marriage stuff was the father paid for the wedding. The father of the bride paid for the wedding because the father also was the groom asked for that father's hand in marriage because the father typically was going to give the groom something for taking up his daughter and taking care of his daughter for the rest of his life. Now, granted, we don't live in that space and time, and we're not antiquated. We don't have milk and maids and all this foolishness. But there are certain expectations that we've carried over, and then we don't carry other expectations over, right? The wife is not chattel. She's not your possession anymore. She is your partner, right? You guys are merging a business. This is a merger, not even an acquisition. This is a merger that two individual companies, as it were, are bringing their stuff to bear to try to merge. And then the people have to decide what is exactly coming in this company and what is exactly not coming in this company. You have 15 college degrees. Are you bringing all of that college debt, sir? Are you bringing all of that to bear and I'm not going to be responsible for taking care of that? Are you bringing all them kids and I'm going to have to pay that child support? Are you bringing that's a real legitimate discussion that people need to have with counsel. Now, I'm not plugging lawyers, but sometimes these emotional decisions are because we can't have them. We already laid the foundation saying men are not as emotional or not willing to share their emotions because men are emotional, but they're not willing to share these things. Sometimes having a referee or detached and neutral person to be able to guide through that, have your own lawyer for a contract. Let her have her own lawyer for a contract. And then go through premarital counseling. So because what may reveal itself is, hey, this merger don't need to happen.
Might not be compatible.
That's okay too. So that's my kind of take on it. And I'm sorry, Dr. Tarver, and refight. Let's go. Get back to fighting.
Let me just take these. All right, Mr. DeRon already on my hit list because he didn't talk about the plus size sisters. I'm kidding. But that leads itself into this conversation about communication. And I think that we as men and women, we struggle to be able to effectively communicate with each other. We all have different perspectives, even on this Zoom call. And at some point, we have to stop a conversation, whether we agree or disagree about the final outcome of it. What would you say, Mr. DeRon, are some of the things that interfere with us being effectively able to communicate with each other?
The desire to be right is a very big component of it. That reacting to how something made you feel, opposed to the motivation or the intent behind the message seems to be, because I get this almost every day. I get it. I hate women. I bash women, and it's like, hold on, how's me telling you how you hurting your relationship bashing you? You know what I mean? Like, if a comedian made a skit showing that women are doing something irrational to have that hurting their relationship, y'all love it, y'all like it, y'all, it's all good. But if I just put it in a post that's bashing women all of a sudden, so it's inconsistencies like that that make it hard to express the male perspective. And when majority of the time the most important issues are happening in an argument or at the time of conflict, it's even harder for a man to get his point across, because as soon as you say, oh, you're making an excuse, oh, you're just a liar, you know what I'm saying? And it's like, now instead of finishing your thought, you have to correct the accusation that was thrown at you, or the assumption that was thrown at you, or the misrepresentation of what you said, you know, like, so it's like most guys can't do that in real time. You know, when they mad and you saying stuff to intentionally piss them off and doing all these type of things, majority of the time he's either gonna meet you at that level or check out. And that's the kind of the barrier that men experience. And like Anthony was saying, a lot of guys struggle to express themselves. That's kind of where I come in. I get so many guys that's like, man, I screenshot your caption and I sent it to my wife, because they can't put a long string of thoughts and explain the process and the rationale behind it and the way that I can. So that's what men often experience. The assumptions that women make about men, what we think and feel, are usually so far-fetched from what we actually think and feel, that just trying to communicate gets frustrating to a point where some guys just stop trying. Because I remember I stopped trying to communicate with my wife early on in my marriage. So that's the male perspective on it. For the men that are effective communicators, that don't have communication issues with their colleagues, with their friends, with nobody else, but they'll have communication issues with the woman they're romantically involved with because of some of those issues.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that the communication challenge when we have them with partners is because we love these people. This is a different type of relationship. So I don't have the same type of relationship with my coworkers. I don't have the same type of relationship with my friends. We don't have children together. We don't have bills together. We don't have to manage household chores together. We don't have, right? So it's a different level of relationship. And I think what the challenge is for both men and women in those situations is, how do I separate out all those other things from us trying to have this conversation in this moment? Because the unfair fighting comes in where now I brought up stuff that's unrelated to what we're talking about, or I've shut down because I make an assumption that you're going to be emotional, or you're going to make a fight out of this, or it's not going to go anywhere. And so I don't even give you an opportunity for us to have a conversation. So I think those are communication problems, even outside of it just being man versus woman. I think that is, how do you communicate with somebody that you have multiple levels of type of relationship with, that ends up being a challenge in those relationships?
Yeah, because I could see that, because you mad about something he didn't fix your tire, but now when he's talking to you about something you did, you take it out like, yeah, that manifests itself all the time, where a man will be talking about problem A and she brings up Q, R, and S, and it's like, that don't got nothing to do with what we was talking about. Men typically don't have that problem when we engage in other men. So that's why I said that's something that I can't even think of no situation where I've had situations like that with and not no guys that I'm cool with or I interact with on a regular basis. Like they don't assume the negative in it and everything that I say. They don't assume malicious intent behind something. A lot of way that a lot of women do when it comes to men. And from my on my page, I often post about, like, how can you view everything from a negative perspective and expect to have a healthy relationship? You know what I mean? Like if you can't trust him to go nowhere without trying to have sex with somebody, why is he your man? Why is this the dude you're trying to get to put a ring on it? You know what I mean? Like, so I try to take the step back and ask those kind of questions, but they very rarely get a direct response.
You know, part of it, I think, is how we're socialized. We're socialized different as men and women. And, you know, going back to this point that the guidelines are different for us in dating. The perceptions are different for us in dating because we're socialized in very different ways. Women, the way that we're socialized is that we talk about things. We talk through it. We'll talk through it in multiple ways, in multiple different times, and we'll come back later and we'll talk about it until we feel like we've addressed it. That's the way we problem solve. We actually think out loud as we problem solve, as opposed to men being socialized in different ways. Because you all are, we're if you think about even how kids play, girls we do fantasy play. We're princesses and dolls, and we're making our little toys talk to each other, and they're in relationships. And we're playing in kitchens and we're doing all of this stuff. Boys are socialized in very different ways because you're not oftentimes even allowed to do that. Like a lot of men's fathers would be like, I wish you would do some fantasy play. I wish you would be over here in this kitchen. Like you're gonna play with these Legos, you're gonna play with these trucks, you're gonna play these sports. And all of those are very different interactions because they require, here's the job and I need to get the job done. Here are the steps to get the job done. And so you're even thought to think about things in very different ways. So when you talk to us, you look at us like, why are you bringing all that extra stuff into the conversation that's not relevant? But for us, it is relevant because it's about this relationship. And so oftentimes we're on two different pages about what's important and what's not important.
Yeah. Women are from Venus and men are from Mars. You think that those things do naturally, like Dr. Tarver said, they do become impediments to the health of, not that people don't have a healthy relationship, but these things become impediments to the health of. And I think what we're pushing you, Mr. DeRon, for is we want to know, what is a clear example of a communication? What's a positive communication pattern that you would suggest to your listeners? What is a positive communication pattern? One example, not the ones that don't work, but what is a positive one example of one that does work?
Well, the most basic form of effective communication is any communication where the intended message is received by the receiver, and you have the opportunity to get feedback, whether it's positive or negative, from that person. And so what often happens though is the communication, the person expresses what they think or feel. I'm mad about this. I feel this way. I want this. Like, people are great at expressing their perspective. It's getting the feedback and not just responding to the feedback. The first thing you got to do is make sure your initial message was accurate. You know what I mean? And so from a guy perspective, you see that all the time. So basically you're telling me you already know that she didn't hear nothing. You know what I'm saying? You already know she totally missed it when she hit you with that cliche. You know what I mean? Like, so a lot of times you spend your time trying to make sure you don't misinterpret what I said, and don't add no assumptions on top of it. You know what I mean? Like, so having a conversation where every time you get to speak, you have to do that, it discourages you from trying to speak. So that missing part of the process is kind of where things go awry, because the conversation almost never goes back to the point where it went off the tracks. And so it's that initial feedback is usually either absent or it's not used accurately to make sure your intended message was accurately received, and then get their response to your accurate message. That's kind of where I see the fatal flaw in communication take place.
I think that's a great pattern. Dr. Tarver, would you agree that if you set those, we talked about some of the impediments, we talked about this is a clear path, positive path to communicating well with Mr. DeRon. What about kind of scene setting and setting the stage of, in our house, in our relationship, we're going to go about it this way, or we're willing to go out. Would you both agree that it's best to set the stage and say we're willing to go out and get some outside professional help or get a relationship guru or coach to kind of help us set the boundaries, because establishing those of this is how we conduct these kind of communications. Naturally, I know plenty of men. It's been my experience that these men will have emotional conversations inside of the conversations that we're not talking about the primary issue, because they've had other things that they wanted to discuss, and they bring them in relationship, communication between men and men, and they bring them in relationship communication between men and women. And so I've seen it on both sides, but I wonder to you, Dr. Tarver, can you build refereeism? Can you build a box to say, in this space we do this, or are there some words you can use? Say, look, pineapples, and let's get out of this space. Well, what are your thoughts on that as part of this follow-up communication conversation?
So you posed a couple of different questions. I'm going to try to answer them in the way that you posed them. The first piece about getting therapy or having a life coach, and this is another gender difference. Men are less likely to come to therapy than women are. And
okay.
So oftentimes I will hear women say that they want their partner to come and do couples therapy, or they want their partner to see a life coach with them, and their partners don't want to because they don't want to bring someone else into the relationship. And so and this goes back to that perspective of he can be a good dude, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he's open to receiving feedback. And so a lot of times there is a lot of fear and concern from some men about coming in to any kind of therapeutic relationship. And part of that is out of fear they're going to get attacked. And so I recognize that is a very valid experience for anyone coming to therapy. It can be a very scary experience. Like, what's going to happen in this room? Am I going to be judged? Are you going to say I'm doing these things awful? Are you going to take her side? A lot of people feel like that's what happens in therapy. It doesn't, but if we don't know that, because we don't know of people that have been and we don't know any therapists, then we're going to have that misperception. So I will say, yes, people need to come to therapy. Yes, people need to do premarital counseling. Yes, people need to do relationship counseling to make sure they learn healthy strategies. What are those healthy strategies? Mr. DeRon just alluded to it. We call it empathic listening. I didn't hear what you said because I'm too busy preparing my rebuttal. So I'm going to tell you how you were wrong and all the different ways that you were wrong. So I missed all the information that you communicated to me. And so if I don't learn how to listen, I'm never going to be a good communicator. That's one important step in healthy communication. Two, what you're alluding to, Attorney Winters, is once we escalate, there is no point to having a conversation. If we're both that angry, that mad, we need to walk away. Sometimes it's hard, as Mr. DeRon said. People want to be right. I want to have the last word. And so, no, you're going to hear what I got to say. But one or both of us need to be able to say, time out. And I do encourage people to have a safe word. You mentioned pineapple, something that's so weird and odd that we wouldn't necessarily fit it in a conversation for us to be clued in. Oh, okay, we don't went too far. Before we start name calling, before somebody says something they want to take back later, before somebody tell you this is why I want to fool with you and why we need a divorce or we don't need to be together, let's stop it with that safe word. And so that's oftentimes how people are able to just de-escalate. Let me go take a break. And when I'm more able to have that rational conversation with you, we can come back and do that later. I'm also a big proponent of writing things down. Sometimes, no, we can't communicate verbally. And yes, emotions can cloud what I'm trying to say because my message may be missed by the way I'm delivering my message. But if I write things down and get those bulleted points, here's what I need to communicate to you. The communication often does end up being more effective.
That's, that writing something down, that's one of my go-to moves for dealing with women, because a lot of times it's hard. Like even with my wife, I'll say, well, if she's saying something that don't make sense, I'll be like, well, write it down, because I know it's hard to write a essay on something that don't make no sense. You know what I'm saying? Like you get to sentence number 3, and it's hard to connect another sentence because and I never have that problem. You know what I mean? Like, so if I got a problem with you, I can A, B, C, D. This is what I did to fix it. This is how you know what I'm saying? Like, I can document because I'm not a problem creator. You know what I mean? Like, nobody don't have no issues with me. Nobody at work. So, and so, like, with my experience, like, it used to be so frustrating, like, just from my early on in my marriage, because anytime I'll have a disagreement with my wife, she would be telling me how bad my communication is. And I'm like, so my line name's communicator. I got a degree in communication. My communication with everybody else is great. But according to you, I'm a horrible communicator. And it took her several years to own up to the problems that she was creating with the communication. And so it just, that write it down, put it in writing. You know what I'm saying? Like whenever I do that, she would get frustrated because she kind of knew, damn, he got me again. I ain't gonna be able to hit him with it. So that's a good one. I would send an email in the like late at night to where they can wake up to your message. Like that's another trick that I think works well. Because a phone call, a text message, those ain't really the most effective methods to resolve or get through a conflict.
Definitely not text message.
So I would, I guess that, kind of piggybacking off of that, you put out you've put out a lot of good kind of content, and Dr. Tarver and I, we discussed some of these things to ad nauseum at times, and at times it feels like it is a lost cause. Like why are we so committed to this internal dating within African American culture? Is it better that people focus on love without these restrictions or these checklists and all of this that we find ourselves being beholden to? Because we set up these, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my supposition is that we set up these rules that we hold over our head, and then we start trying to go out and find a partner to fit that rule. So we live in that space. And then, so maybe similar to like marrying at first sight, or, opening the dating pool to saying, I can maybe find my partner or somebody who I'm more compatible with outside of my race. Do you believe that it is a lost cause, number one? And two, do you think they should open up the dating pool to outside of their race?
Man, this is a tough. I usually don't discuss race and dating. Dating is
Let me get my earrings ready.
But I don't discuss it because I know Black women would feel attacked and et cetera. Feel like I'm coming for Black women or whatnot. But I'm married to a Black woman. Like I only date Black women. You know what I mean? Like, so I don't. That's definitely not the case. I don't think it's a lost cause. It's definitely possible for I don't believe everybody operates in a way that is conducive to a healthy relationship. So that being said,
choose those words carefully. Choose them carefully.
I think a large percentage of people are capable if they make some adjustments or to either how they think, operate, or view the opposite sex. If they can come, if we can make sure that their expectations of how a healthy relationship functions, is formed, et cetera, is realistic and practical, that checkbox. Make sure that they have methods to determine whether they're actually compatible with somebody or not. Get that checkbox. You know what I'm saying? Like if you can get, like I created a dating and compatibility guide that kind of, hey, let's dummy proof the process. You know what I'm saying? Like check for this, check for communication, reliability, you know what I'm saying? Responsibility, ambition. Like it's telling you just kind of what to look for, because these are the things that make it possible for you to last with somebody for a long period of time. But yeah, it's possible, you know what I mean? Like we have, as African Americans, we have a particular set of issues that is a direct reflection from slavery and white supremacy. And if you're not aware of that and how that impacts Black men and women in relations, then that's part of the problem. But you don't always want to just bring up the race card every time we're talking about dating. But the way that a lot of Black women view Black men is a direct result of slavery and the financial position that Black men was put into compared to white men. White man represents wealth, stability, the American dream, etc., and the Black man represents single motherhood for the most part, for the way that a lot of women perceive Black men. All my pain came from you. All my past trauma. Y'all let me down. My dad let me down. You know what I'm saying? So it's like we got a whole bunch of negativity to overcome reach that healthy space. So it's possible. We just got more, healing or repairing to do for our community in order to make those numbers flourish like they did back in the 50s and 60s.
Well, I see Dr. Tarver is not putting her Vaseline on her eyes just for this fight. So that truth that you just spoke seems to be working. So, Dr. Tarver, I would pose it to you. I hear, I've heard it a ton, and I'm sure both of you all have heard it a ton. Black women are saying consistently, I want to be with a brother. They want to keep our culture going, as it were, with two Black parents, and they strive for that, and that's why they work so extremely exhaustingly hard to have a relationship with an African American male who has experienced this American experiment similar to them. And so, do you think it's a lost cause internally dating? And do you think that they should open the dating pool, considering some of these things that we posed today?
I will, believe it or not, agree with Mr. DeRon on the checklist part. And because I do think, and we have had a lot of conversations about this, I talk to people about dating being like job searching. So why are you interviewing people that don't even meet your minimum qualifications, much less your preferred qualifications? I do think that is a waste of people's time. Women tend to stay in relationships much longer, even when they're unhealthy. And so what we want to do is stack the deck. So let's get someone who actually does meet those needs that you have, instead of you trying to, because we like to fix folks. We like a good project. Instead of me trying to fix someone who is, one, not mine to fix, and two, that is not how I should be approaching a relationship. Let me actually meet with someone who we have more similar values, because that is going to help our communication. That is going to have, where we come from is going to be very similar in terms of child rearing, discipline, finances, how we communicate, how we view family, instead of me dealing with someone who, as Mr. DeRon says on some of his podcasts, can't even show up to pick you up on a date because they don't have transportation. So, and that's not a knock against someone, but if that's not what I'm looking for, then why am I bringing you in for an interview? I only need to be bringing in those qualified candidates. The other part of that is, I will say that he's absolutely right. You both are right. Like Black women, we love Black men. Now, there is a strained relationship. You're absolutely right, Mr. DeRon. Some of us have not had the greatest relationships with other men in our lives, whether that be fathers, grandfathers, uncles, brothers, whoever it may be, people that we've dated. And we bring wounds into our relationships. Men and women bring wounds into our relationships. And that is what guides us in the choices that we make. And if we don't heal from those wounds, we will continue to make those same mistakes over and over again. And so oftentimes we end up being in relationships with people that are going to hurt us, because that's the wound that we have. So I'm going to go pick someone who was like my mother, who was abusive and critical, because that's what I'm used to. And I'm going to pick someone who isn't faithful to me, because that's all I saw growing up. So if I don't fix that within me, there's nothing that any potential partner is going to be able to do to help me with that issue. But some of us look at other ethnicities very skeptical, because there are stereotypes that were discussed today about Black women. Other ethnicities have stereotypes about Black women too. And so we get a lot of negative feedback, even from other ethnic groups, about, oh, Black women, we know y'all got a lot of attitudes, y'all difficult to deal with, difficult to work with, nobody want to fool with y'all. And so you don't even want to go into that. And then some of us, the idea of a white man who we know raped some of our ancestors, like we just can't get to that level. Like I can't see past that hurt from the enslavement experience. And so I don't want to be in that relationship with you. And not that there's not good, healthy white people out there that aren't abusive and aren't trying to rape, pillage, and plunder. But to be able to separate oneself from that is difficult for a lot of Black women. And so, yes, interracial dating for us sometimes is not an option.
That's fascinating. And, Dr. Tarver, I was reading some of our guest's book, in Terry DeRon's book. It's not that complicated how real men feel about sex, love, and relationship. The book seems to be a blueprint of sorts on, without placating to those desires of understanding or getting into the mind, the thoughts and intentions of real men, as we say. And only distinguishment of real men is really about a play of men who are going to be earnest and honest and fair dealing, plain dealing, with their partner. This is who I am, and this is what I'm not. This is all I got. This is look. I ain't no tricks. I ain't got no sleeves. This is who I am, and not these F boys that he refers to. And you can learn more about that on his podcast. But a critic described the book as a clear, concise breakdown on how quality men view sex, love relationships, and all topics related to dating. The book helps clear up a lot of myths and misinformation that is fed to women about how men think and how men operate versus getting it from men about how men think and how men operate. What has been, the reception of your followers or engagers? Are they utilizing some of these blueprints that you've laid out, or you find it argumentative, or find
a small percentage, man. My primary platform is social media. And so a lot of women are just kind of addicted to the drama in the comments. So they come to my page just to be a troll or just to argue and just to be in the men do this, so like it's kind of like in the comment section, it's a battle of the sexes, for lack of a better terms. But the women that actually read the book or download the dating guides that actually come to my page to learn, they have drastic results, because a lot of their problem is the information that they use to formulate their strategies is either useless information that was passed down to them from their aunts or somebody else, or it's assumptions about men that they made up themselves. You know what I mean? Like, and so when you correct some of those things and learn how to stop making so many assumptions, to consider that there are other possibilities, that a lot of times the things women assume men are thinking are the furthest things from our mind, because our experience is a lot of times women are judging us based off of a female value system. And so if you don't handle a situation how she would have handled it, or you don't say what she would have said in her brain, you wrong, and she's got an issue with it. And it's like, hold on. I don't tell you how to be a woman. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not telling you that you're wrong for not caring about the NFL playoffs like I do. You know what I mean? Like, so it's a really unfair scenario that men find themselves in when you're being criticized for thinking like a man when that's what you're asked to do. You know what I mean? Like, so as far as the book goes, for the women that actually listen and get that real perspective on learning what a quality man is and isn't, how we really operate, and dispelling some of those myths, it's almost impossible to not have a better dating experience when you get clarity on a lot of those things.
Dr. Tarver?
I have not read your book, so I cannot comment on your book. I will say to you that there are a lot of your strategies that I do like. Just going on your social media posts and checking that out, there are some things that I very much agree with. There are some points that I think are very valid. I just look at it from the perspective of they're valid for both men and for women. And I think oftentimes what women get frustrated about is that they feel like the stereotypes of women, that we're combative, argumentative, make assumptions, are difficult to communicate with, try to get you to think the same way that we think, can be very much assumptions. They're not always true. And I can very much argue that for some men, it is very difficult for them to receive feedback. And that because they make those assumptions about women, that it is difficult for them to communicate. So I will say that for some of your viewers, they're not always just trolling and trying to give you a hard time. But their struggle is that sometimes it feels like the perspective is, here's where you women need to address things. But then I don't acknowledge that men have these same challenges. Even if they're these good quality men, they can still struggle with these same challenges too. And just like I don't want you all making assumptions about us, I think it's important that I present a fair and balanced side, not to make assumptions about you.
And I think that brings me right into my next question was, we talk about this in accountability and on both sides. Dr. Tarver, what are some ways that men can be more accountable? And I know we're saying, look, it applies to women, but we've already laid the foundation earlier in this podcast where we said that men and women are socialized different. Like, it's hard to unsocialize these behavior patterns that have been trained and thrust upon you at the church, at the schoolhouse, on the boys don't cry, and girls, don't ride pickup trucks, and all this foolishness that we've laid out to try to negate the humanity of us all, that we are human and we will make decisions that are different than every other same-sex human. And so when we look at it, how are men to be more accountable and not be characterized as F-boys? If someone naturally has on occasion where you may start with someone, you may engage with someone, you may want to be with that person for a long time, and then that energy goes away, and you don't, how are ways for people to be more accountable and tell these truths about that, and men not feel so emotional that they're now an F-boy, or viewed as that when they're just struggling with that commitment, or that commitment has now changed. How do we get to that point? And then separating that. So that's one, because I know I love to ask double questions.
Yes, you do.
And then the second part of that is those men who we formally all agreed are F-boys, or non-prime dating partners, or not people that we want to be with if we're being purposeful and strategic in our dating. That's not our ideal partner, whether it's a man or a woman. How does that person improve themselves? Like, if they're trying to improve, do we cut them under? Like, if that person had kids, he got a couple of baby mamas, is he out of the dating pool? If she's got a couple of baby daddies, is she out of the dating pool? So that space. So the first space is, so I'll just let y'all try to answer those two questions. I'm just so fascinated by this shit. I'm just learning.
We've been able to be okay. We're gonna end this conversation and be on good terms. No, in all seriousness, like I very much appreciate, Mr. DeRon, your platform and how you use your platform. And in terms of accountability, I think that's one of the ways where we can have more accountability, is for people to talk to each other about things like this. That it is that men hear other men say that you can go to therapy, and it doesn't mean you're weak or inadequate or damaged in some way. It is simply another resource that you can utilize in order for you to be your healthiest self. I like to hear men talk about being married in a positive way. I like to hear men talking to other men about, you're gonna have challenges, relationships are gonna be difficult, but if you leave out and you start something else in the midst of this, I can guarantee you that's not gonna turn out really well. And so I think that's another level of accountability. And I think oftentimes, you made this point earlier, Mr. DeRon, and I agree, like, a woman can't teach a man to be a man. A man has to teach a man to be a man. Just like a woman gets to teach a woman how to be a woman, because you have that experience and that knowledge and that background. It doesn't mean we can't share information, but you as a man know what the man experience is like. I will never, as a woman, know what it's like to be a man. And so it's important that you all as men create spaces of comfort for other men to talk about these things. And by all means, please get rid of these negative ways that we're raising our young boys, that they can't have emotions, that they can't have feelings, that they can't express themselves, that if they do things that are what people consider gay are going to make them sissies or punks, that we remove that from them, instead of allowing our men to have a wider perspective, because this is going to answer that piece about the communication. If I never learned how to communicate as a kid, because I wasn't ever allowed to communicate, and I was just taught, hey, you show up and you take care of what you need to take care of, and I don't want to hear anything about it, then how am I expected to learn how to communicate as a man? So that's the accountability piece, is men talking to other men about healthier ways to be men. In terms of the other piece, are those folks out of the dating pool simply because they are not up to those standards? No, they're not. They're not out of the dating pool. Now, they may not necessarily be the best fit for somebody who's further along in their journey. Nobody likes to be parented. So you definitely don't want to get with a partner that is going to say, well, you need to grow in these areas, so let me pull you along. Let me tell you what you're doing wrong. Like, that feels horrible. Nobody needs to be in that relationship. Completely disrespectful. So as you're growing in that, you may decide, maybe I don't want to date as much, maybe I want to work on these things first, and maybe I want to focus on dating in smaller amounts or figuring out the type of healthy people to date. But I'm not just out of the dating pool. I think we see ourselves as damaged, and when we do, then we end up getting with people that aren't going to validate us and love us and take care of us. So if you're feeling that way, then you don't need to be dating. You need to be working on yourself first, and then you can get into dating.
Wow.
Yeah. As far as being on the dating pool, man, in any market system, the consumers and the market is going to balance itself out. So the negative check marks or the hits that a person has on them, you got 4 baby daddies and whatever the case, male or female, that just makes you less desirable to the people that you may be interested in. Does that mean you're not a quality person? Does that mean that you couldn't possibly meet with somebody? Absolutely not. You could have a Brady Bunch. Y'all both got 4 kids. You know what I'm saying? Like it's possible. Financially, that'd be a nightmare. I can't imagine that type of household, but it's possible because in order to just make a relationship last, in order, when you look at the natural pattern of dating, you meet, y'all hang out, y'all start kicking it. It's really just having positive experiences and being able to resolve the issues. That's the part. You know what I mean? Like, unless there's some major blow up or something that causes you to cut the person off, if you got those 2 things, if you like hanging out with them, you looking forward to seeing them again, and when y'all do have beef, y'all can get through it, then it's very likely that you're gonna be dating the same chick from last homecoming or from last year, or they're gonna be more and more a part of your life, and that's how you get to the marriage, that actually lasts. But a lot of people try to fast forward the process. They skip steps. They try to, find shortcuts or life hacks or things of that nature, and put themselves in predicaments that they probably should never be in the first place. But it's possible for those people. I don't think nothing, people ask questions, should a person that's broke not date? Like, you still gonna get horny, you still gonna desire companionship, and if you're attractive, you still gonna have people shooting their shot at you. So that's not really practical to expect somebody to just give up on that, because you can be broke and still be a great person to talk to, hang out with, and have sex with.
Yeah, no, I think you guys both hit it on the head on that. Y'all both knocked out of the park, because I know I was like, wow, Dr. Tarver just gave this amazing answer. I was like, how are you gonna follow that up? And Mr. DeRon, you definitely did. You followed it up very well. Dr. Tarver, are there some resources that you can help our listeners we can drive them to?
Absolutely. So there are a lot of different ways that people can find information. Like Mr. DeRon has podcasts, he's on social media. There is a podcast and a social media following that I like for some of the women that may be coming to you, Mr. DeRon, and saying they need more information, and it's called Therapy for Black Girls. It's therapyforblackgirls.com, has a bunch of resources on it, including how to find a therapist and find a therapist in your area. So it's statewide, across the states you can find, and actually you don't even have to be a woman to do that. You can be a male as well if you prefer a Black female therapist, because it's literally a roster of Black female therapists in all of the United States. Dr. Joy Harden has worked really hard to put this together. And much like you, she has a podcast, she's on social media, and she's addressing these things. But also, if you're looking for a therapist, then there is a mental health hotline that people can access, 844-549-4266, and it will help you find a therapist. And so I am pro therapy. I am pro working on yourself, getting yourself to a healthy place before you get in a relationship. And we have plenty of Black therapists. So if that's what a person is looking for, then we definitely have resources for them.
Well, in our own defense podcast, we've been discussing in this particular episode barriers to healthy dating relationships, and we had the privilege of bringing on author, coach, Mr. Terry DeRon. Mr. DeRon, if you don't mind, in closing, can you give us your contact information, and so our listeners will be able to follow you and purchase your book, the first book, Game Recognized Game, the novel that you wrote back when you were in college. Man, you make me feel bad. And then It's Not That Complicated, How Real Men Feel About Sex, Love, and Relationship. How do our listeners reach out to you or contact you or follow you? What's the best way to communicate with you?
I can be reached. My website is just terryderon.com. It's TerryDeron.com. Or you can follow me on social media at Terry DeRon. My link in my Instagram bio, it has, I have a link tree with links to my podcast, to my YouTube channel, and to all of my content. So between my website and my Instagram page, the person can be able to access all my content.
I find it just absolutely amazing that you're able to constantly and consistently follow the diatribe that kind of goes on under. You make a simple post, and thousands of people communicate after you've done that, because you give out what I think is fair and balanced, objective truths based on how a real man feels. Now, there may be other opinions, but you lay out yours so very eloquently, and we're honored to have you on this show to meet the muster and really kind of go head to head with Dr. Tarver, because I mean I couldn't do it. She not, but it was really good to see you here on the show. And so, did you have any final words that you would want to offer to our listeners?
Well, I think y'all do a good job of. This is a very professional podcast, very well organized, and how you guys all the prep work and everything that you got going into it. So it's reflected throughout the conversation. So I like that. I think y'all doing a good job. Y'all on the right path. Podcasting. Getting your feet into it and collaborating with other people, getting the episodes and cross collaborating with other people with platforms that definitely help you grow and get your numbers up. But I enjoyed the conversation. It's always good to get a different perspective. So Dr. Tarver, I appreciate you being a woman and having a professional perspective, and not doing some of the things that usually happen when I'm having these kind of conversations. What it gets off rev. You touch a nerve or you say something that might trigger them. But I think you did a really good job of keeping it about the conversation and not taking offense to nothing. Not that I was trying to offend you or anything, but I enjoy conversations like this where I'm talking to intelligent people that can actually articulate themselves. And if I did have a question or a follow-up, they can provide a legitimate answer and don't just talk around, talk in circles or whatnot. So I think this is a real productive conversation. I think your listeners will get a lot out of it.
So thank you. Dr. Tarver?
I appreciate, because I know it is more than a notion to come on with a woman to talk about relationships, and I'm sure there was probably some initial anxiety about how this conversation was going to go. But I think we did a great job in modeling. Like, we don't have to agree on everything. Our perspectives can be very different, and they can still be valid perspectives, and we can have a good conversation and leave people with some good, helpful tips that they can utilize to be more effective communicators. So I appreciate the work that you're doing, that you're attempting to try to help people grow in that area. And it was more than a pleasure to be able to have a conversation with you today. Thank you for coming to our show.
Anytime.
And then closing on my part, I'm just happy that I was able to be here, see it live, and just absorb these truths. I think I grew from it, and I definitely learned, and I want to put these tools in my toolkit. In our Own Defense podcast, we have been discussing barriers to healthy dating relationships with author and life coach, Mr. Terry DeRon. This concludes this episode of In Our Own Defense podcast. We're your hosts, Attorney A.D. Winters and Dr. Dolores Tarver. For more information about our podcast, please follow us on social media, on Instagram at In Our Own Defense, or you can email us at inourown defense@gmail.com. Thank you for listening.